They say that the wounds inflicted by enemies are sharp, but it is the wounds from those we once called family, friend, or beloved that pierce the deepest. A stranger may strike and be forgotten, but when it is someone you loved, someone you trusted, someone who once held your heart in their hands, that is no ordinary pain. That is a betrayal of the sacred, a distortion of what was supposed to be safe. What do you do when the hands that were supposed to hold you upright were the very ones that shoved you to the ground? What do you do when the voices that once called your name in affection now echo in your mind with words of rejection, ridicule, and rage? You don't just hurt. You question everything. You question your worth, your judgment, your goodness. You begin to wonder if you were blind all along, or worse, if you were never worthy of love to begin with. But let me ask you something that may shake the silence of your suffering. What if your pain wasn't invisible? What if the tears you cried in isolation were counted one by one? What if the God who knit you together in your mother's womb saw everything? Every conversation behind your back, every manipulative glance, every moment you were left out, abandoned, betrayed, and blamed. God saw it all. Not from a distance, but from within your story. He was there in the room when they said what they said. He was with you when your heart broke, and He is still with you now. It is a terrifying truth for those who thought their cruelty would remain hidden, because when God sees, He does not forget. He does not ignore. He does not allow injustice to continue unchecked. God may be silent for a season, but His silence is not approval, it is preparation. And so, you, yes, you who were wounded by the ones who should have been your shelter, you must understand something vital. The depth of your pain is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of the depth of your capacity to love. They hurt you more than strangers ever could, because you gave them a place in your heart that strangers were never allowed to reach. And that is not shameful, that is sacred. They mistook your loyalty for naivety. They confused your kindness with permission. But God does not confuse. God discerns. And where they saw weakness, God sees strength in disguise. You may have walked away feeling broken, discarded, or unworthy, but heaven sees the entire truth. Heaven sees what they tried to bury. Have you ever wondered why their actions haunt you more than you want them to? Why you replay their words like broken records in your mind, hoping for a different ending? It's because part of your soul still believes love shouldn't wound like this. And you're right. Love shouldn't hurt. Love shouldn't betray. Love shouldn't use silence as punishment or lies as protection. But people do. And when they do, when they abandon you without explanation, when they mock your pain or pretend they never caused it, know this: God takes it personally. Not because you're perfect, but because you belong to Him. You are His creation, His child. And what they did to you was not just an offense against your dignity, it was an offense against His design. And God is not blind to that. So what now? How do you walk forward when your heart has been shattered by those who were supposed to protect it? You begin by recognizing that your healing does not begin with their apology. It begins with God's presence. Healing is not waiting for them to see the light. Healing is stepping into the light of the one who saw everything in the dark. They may never acknowledge the damage they caused. They may continue to live in denial. They may even twist the narrative to make you the villain of their story. But God's story is not written in lies. It is carved in truth. And the truth is, you were hurt unjustly. You were used unfairly. and God saw it all. This is not about revenge. This is about restoration. God is not interested in shallow justice. He is after deep transformation, and he begins with the ones who were wounded. You see, while they walked away, thinking it was over, God stayed behind to rebuild you. He stayed to collect the pieces of your shattered heart. He stayed to whisper truths louder than their lies. He stayed because he never left. The same God who watched you be betrayed is the same God who is now preparing your elevation. And make no mistake, you will rise. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Not in vengeance, but in vindication. Not in hatred, but in holy strength. They hurt you more than strangers ever could, because they were closer. But closeness is not the same as care, and God is about to show you the difference. He is going to make you whole in the very places they tried to break you. He is going to bless you in the very areas they tried to curse. He is going to lift you in the exact moments they hoped you would stay buried, because God is not just watching, he is writing. And the chapter they tried to end with, betrayal, is only the beginning of your restoration. There are seasons in life when silence becomes your closest companion, not because you have nothing to say, but because the pain is too heavy to translate into words. You find yourself rehearsing conversations in your mind, imagining what you might say if you had one more chance to ask, why? But the silence on the other end is louder than any answer could ever be. And still, God hears the words you never spoke. He interprets your groanings. He translates the ache in your chest. He understands what your tears are trying to communicate when your lips cannot. He is not asking you to explain your pain. He is asking you to let him carry it. What they broke in you, he is not merely trying to fix. He is trying to reforge into something even stronger, something sacred. You are not being repaired, you are being remade. You are not returning to who you were before the betrayal. You are being transformed into someone who can stand taller, love deeper, and discern faster. It's not easy. Growth never is, especially when it is forced through the doorway of heartbreak. But this is not the end. This is the valley that leads to the mountaintop. And while they may have left you for dead in the shadows of disappointment, God is breathing life into your dry bones. Perhaps you didn't see it then. Perhaps you thought you were being punished. But what if the breaking was the beginning of your becoming? Sometimes, God allows the illusions to shatter so we stop building our hope on unstable ground. He allows the masks of others to fall, not to destroy our peace, but to protect it. You saw the betrayal as a tragedy, but heaven saw it as a rescue. You were rescued from false love, rescued from fake loyalty, rescued from relationships that drained your spirit and distorted your reflection. They may have taken from you, but they also freed you. Freed you to become aligned with truth, freed you to rediscover the God who never lies, never leaves, and never deceives. And still, even with this understanding, there is a sting, isn't there? Because it wasn't just what they did, it was who they were to you. That's what makes it so painful. That's what makes the nights long and the mornings heavy. You didn't just lose a person, you lost the version of yourself that once trusted them. You lost the comfort of believing that love once given would be honored. But love was never supposed to be a gamble. And your sincerity was never the problem. Their dishonor was. And for that, they will answer not to you, but to the one who entrusted them with your heart. God never hands people to each other without accountability. Every relationship is a divine stewardship, and when people misuse that stewardship, when they take your loyalty and turn it into leverage, when they use your kindness as currency, when they turn your vulnerability into a weapon, God does not shrug. He responds. But his response is not always immediate, and that's where faith must hold you. You may look around and see them thriving. You may scroll through their life and see smiles, celebrations, and progress. And deep inside, you may whisper, how? How are they doing fine after what they did? How can they sleep at night while I'm still wrestling with what they said and did? Don't be deceived by appearances. There is no peace for the wicked. There is no rest for those who have crushed the innocent. The outward projection of joy is not the same as inner wholeness. And while they may look like they've moved on, they carry seeds of their own destruction. Because anything built on betrayal cannot stand for long. God's justice is not like human justice. It does not require public spectacle. It works in the unseen, in the quiet. It enters their sleep. It whispers in their conscience. It speaks in their disappointments. It surfaces in the relationships they try to build but cannot maintain because they never learned how to love without using. And eventually they come to realize, sometimes far too late, that the one they mistreated was the one sent by God to bless their life. But by then, your story will have moved on, not in pride, but in purpose. You will have walked through the fire and not been burned. You will have passed through the storm and discovered an anchor far stronger than human approval. You will have healed in places you didn't know were broken. And you will know something deeper than peace. You will know discernment. That's what pain gives you if you allow it to be redeemed. It doesn't just give you scars. It gives you eyes to see clearly. It strips away illusions, reveals true colors, and draws a line between those who say they care and those who actually do. And that wisdom becomes your protection. They cannot hurt you the same way again because you are not the same person. You no longer apologize for loving deeply, but you've learned to guard the gates of your heart. You no longer crave validation from the ones who misused your openness. You've learned that the only validation that counts comes from God, and His opinion of you has never changed. He still sees you as worthy, as chosen, as valuable. Not because you've never been hurt, but because you endured it with grace, because you didn't return evil for evil, because you allowed the pain to break you open, not break you down. And in the end, that is what separates you from them. They used pain to control, you used pain to grow. They used your wounds as an opportunity for power. You used your wounds as a pathway to wisdom. They abandoned the light, you ran toward it. And though the road is long and the nights are sometimes cold, God walks with you. He speaks in ways they never could. He sees what they refused to, and He knows how to turn the most devastating chapters into sacred altars of healing. They hurt you more than strangers ever could, but that's because you gave them access. And now, God is teaching you how to give Him that same access, to let Him enter the places where you were mishandled, to let Him hold the parts of your story that still ache, to let Him rebuild the identity they tried to erase. Because you are not who they said you were in their moment of cruelty. You are not the lies they told to justify their behavior. You are not the character in their twisted version of the story. You are who God says you are, before, during, and after the betrayal. And that truth cannot be altered by their silence, their absence, or their denial. It lives beyond them, and so do you. 'Tis a strange ache, the kind that comes from realizing you were never truly seen by those you loved most. You thought they knew your heart. You believed they understood your intentions. You assumed they would never twist your silence, your patience, or your grace into something to be discarded or taken advantage of. But then, without warning, they did. And in that moment, something sacred inside you shattered. Not just trust in them, but trust in yourself. You begin to doubt your perception, your memories, your worth. You replay every conversation, searching for clues that you missed, signs you ignored. You wonder how love so warm could grow so cold. But let this be a quiet revelation in your wilderness. It was never about your failure to love. It was about their failure to recognize it. God, however, does not overlook what is true. He sees with a clarity that pierces through every mask, every lie, every pretense. Where others saw you as disposable, God saw you as divine. Where they minimized your presence, heaven magnified your purpose. And in this divine knowing there is rest. You do not need to prove your value to those who chose not to honor it. Your existence is not a courtroom where their validation is required. God has already declared your worth, and He did so before they ever came into your life. The pain they inflicted does not rewrite the truth God wrote about you. Sometimes the hurt comes not just from what they did, but from what they failed to do. The birthdays forgotten, the texts ignored, the moments of need met with silence. You didn't need grand gestures. You needed presence, honesty, kindness. But instead they gave you distance, deception, and disregard. And in doing so, they lost something far more valuable than your loyalty. They lost your trust, and trust, once broken by betrayal, is not easily restored. But even in this heartbreak, God is working. He is not only healing what they fractured, He is sanctifying it. The tears you cried in secret have been seen. The prayers whispered into your pillow have been heard. The wounds they denied inflicting are being redeemed by a God who never turns away from pain, no matter how silent or hidden it has become. You are not forgotten in your suffering. You are being transformed within it. There is a sacredness in being misunderstood. It carves something deep into your soul, a wisdom that no textbook or sermon can teach. You begin to understand what truly matters. You learn to listen to silence. You grow acquainted with solitude. And in that solitude you begin to hear the voice of the one who never left you, not even for a moment. It is here that your strength is reborn, not the brittle strength of self-defense, but the quiet strength of knowing who walks beside you. The strength of realizing that you were never meant to carry the burden of others' choices. The strength of releasing the need for closure from those who never had the courage to give it. You begin to lay down the heavy questions. Why did they do this? What did I do wrong? And instead, you start to ask a better question. What is God doing with this? And when you ask that question sincerely, the veil begins to lift. You realize that the betrayal didn't define you, it refined you. You understand that the rejection didn't break you, it positioned you. Because sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as heartbreak. Sometimes God uses loss to protect you from what you could not see and to prepare you for what only He can provide. The ones who hurt you more than strangers ever could were given access they never deserved. But God is reclaiming every place in your soul that they mishandled. He is walking through the ruins of what they abandoned, and He is planting gardens where they left ashes. His restoration is not rushed, it is deliberate, it is deep, and it is holy. As you look back, you will begin to see the fingerprints of grace in places where you once only saw grief. The moments you thought were wasted will reveal themselves as the very chapters God was using to equip you for something greater. Your heart, though scarred, will beat with renewed purpose. Your soul, though bruised, will rise with greater clarity, and your spirit, though weary, will begin to dance again. There will be a time when the memory of their betrayal will no longer sting, but instruct. When their absence will no longer feel like loss, but freedom. When their silence will no longer feel like abandonment, but protection. You will no longer carry the weight of their rejection. You will carry the wisdom born from surviving it. In time, you will no longer define yourself by what they did, but by what God is doing. Not because the pain was small, but because the healing was greater. Not because they were right to treat you that way, but because God was right to pull you through it. They thought your kindness made you weak. They thought your loyalty made you foolish, but they were wrong. It takes far more strength to keep loving when you've been hurt than it does to walk away bitter. It takes divine courage to continue hoping in the goodness of God when people have shown you the opposite. And you, in your pain, have become a vessel for that kind of courage. Do not be ashamed of how deeply you loved. Do not regret how much you gave. Those qualities are not your flaws, they are your fingerprints. And while others may not have known how to hold them with care, God does. He is holding them now. Even as you read these words, there is a divine hand mending what human hands have torn. There is a holy presence filling the empty places. There is a quiet whisper replacing the noise of their betrayal. That whisper is saying, I saw it all, and I am not finished with you yet. There is a sacred kind of strength that is born not in triumph, but in trial. A strength forged not in applause, but in abandonment. It is the strength that rises after betrayal, when your soul has been emptied of every illusion and every false comfort, and yet somehow still chooses to stand, not with fists clenched in vengeance, but with arms open in surrender. Not to the ones who hurt you, but to the God who heals you. You didn't ask for this kind of strength. You didn't sign up for the lessons betrayal would teach you. You never imagined that someone you once defended would be the one you'd have to heal from. But here you are, still breathing, still standing, still fighting not to become bitter in a world that often rewards cruelty, and that in itself is a quiet miracle. It is easy to become what hurt you, easy to mirror back the same apathy, the same neglect, the same dismissal. But you have chosen another path, the narrow road, the harder way, the one that says, I will not let what they did rewrite who I am. And that choice is not weak, it is holy, because it reflects the nature of a God who blesses even those who curse him, who forgives those who wound him, who walks with those who deny him. And if you've made it this far, then you are not walking alone. God walks with those who have been wronged. He shelters those who have been cast aside. He lifts those who have been buried by lies, and lifts them not to prove a point to others, but to prove his faithfulness to them. You may not have justice in the way you imagined it, but that does not mean God is inactive. His justice is not always loud, but it is always exact. And when God moves, he does not simply restore what was lost, he multiplies it. He doesn't just give back what was stolen, he adds to it. He doesn't just mend what was broken, he transforms it. What they meant for harm, God shapes into strength. What they tried to take, he uses as the very material for your future foundation. But to see this clearly, you must be willing to let go of what you hoped would happen. You must release the fantasy that one day they'll come back and say all the right things. You must surrender the craving for an apology that may never come. Because the truth is, some people will never admit what they did, not because it wasn't wrong, but because admitting it would require more integrity than they are willing to cultivate. And that's not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for their awakening. You are responsible for your own healing, for your own peace, for your own return to wholeness. And that return begins when you stop trying to make sense of why they acted like strangers when they once acted like family. Sometimes the answer isn't found in their behavior, but in your own heart. Your heart that was open, giving, hopeful, a heart that wanted to believe the best in others even when the signs pointed otherwise. That is not foolishness. That is innocence. And innocence is never a crime. If anything, it is a reflection of divine purity in a world that has forgotten how to love without conditions. And while that kind of heart will often be hurt, it will also be the kind of heart that God defends most fiercely. So take heart. You are not wrong to love. You are not wrong to give. You are not wrong to believe. The wrong does not lie in your compassion. It lies in their corruption. And God is not blind to that. The day they chose betrayal over honesty, the day they turned cold instead of communicating, the day they let pride silence what should have been repentance, those were not just poor decisions. They were breaches of something sacred. And breaches have consequences. Not because God is angry, but because truth, by its very nature, corrects what is out of alignment. And everything they did to hurt you, deny you, belittle you, He saw it and He recorded it, not out of vengeance, but out of divine justice. There are consequences to harming the heart of the innocent, and there are blessings in bearing that harm with grace. You in your silence were not forgotten. You in your ache were not abandoned. You in your confusion were not cast aside. Heaven leaned in closer. Angels stood guard. God prepared something deeper than comfort. He prepared transformation. And this transformation is not just about you rising above the pain. It's about you becoming the kind of soul that pain can no longer control. The kind of person who doesn't need everyone to understand in order to move forward. The kind of spirit that knows when God is for you, no one can stand against you, not even those who once held your heart in their hands. You may never receive a confession from them, but you will receive clarity. You may never hear their repentance, but you will hear God's reassurance. And in time, you will no longer ache for them to come back. You will thank God that they left. Because God doesn't just remove people from your life. He delivers you from them. Not because they were always evil, but because they were no longer aligned with the future He had written for you. And what God separates, He sanctifies. What He removes, He replaces with something greater. And in the space they left behind, God enters. With healing, with presence, with purpose, with a plan. Not a single tear has been wasted, not a single night of heartbreak ignored, not a single betrayal unnoticed. He saw everything, and that means your story is not over. It's just beginning. You've carried the weight of what they did like a secret wound, hidden beneath smiles, buried under busyness, wrapped in silence that few dared to question. The world may have assumed you moved on, that you were fine, but only you and God know the silent wars you've fought to stay grounded when everything in you wanted to collapse. And yet, here you are, not because they apologized, not because it all made sense, but because God held you when they dropped you. There is something holy about surviving what was meant to break you. Not because survival is the goal, but because in surviving, you begin to see who truly sustains you. The people who hurt you may have walked away thinking they took something vital from your life, but what they could never take was the God who walked into the wreckage and whispered, "I'm still here." And it is that presence that has held you together when the voices of doubt tried to scatter your sense of worth, when shame crept in like a fog, when anger tempted you to become someone you're not. There, in that moment, God began to redefine what strength really means, not as something loud or forceful, but as something quiet, unshakable, deeply rooted in faith. A strength that doesn't need revenge to feel whole. A strength that can stare down betrayal and say, "You don't get to rewrite my identity." They thought your breaking point would be the end, but God always knew it would be your turning point. And this turning point isn't just about healing, it's about vision. You begin to see what you couldn't see before. You recognize toxic patterns sooner. You hear the difference between flattering words and truthful ones. You no longer chase peace in people who create storms. Your discernment sharpens, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom born through fire. That wisdom does something sacred. It rearranges your inner world. It strips away the desire to prove yourself to those who never cared to understand you. It loosens the grip of needing to be chosen by those who only saw you as convenient. It replaces people-pleasing with God-pleasing. And in that shift, something deep inside you begins to rest. For so long you may have believed their mistreatment said something about you, that if you were better, they would have stayed. If you were enough, they would have honored you. But now, with clearer eyes and a wiser soul, you understand, people don't leave because you were too much. They leave because they were never enough to carry the beauty of your heart. They were not equipped to handle someone who loved without manipulation, who forgave without being asked, who gave without keeping score. And so they turned your purity into a burden. But God has always seen it as your greatest strength, and what God treasures, He protects. You may not have seen it at the time, but their absence was the beginning of a divine unveiling. It made room for something real, for relationships not rooted in competition or convenience, but in covenant and care, for connections that don't just admire you, but protect your peace, for people who see the weight you carry and choose to help, not add more. God is faithful to replace what is lost when it is surrendered. He does not force you to hold on to what hurts just because it's familiar. He gently asks you to open your hands and release what no longer reflects His purpose for your life. And in that act of surrender, He begins to pour in what your soul has longed for: true love, deep connection, and unshakable belonging. Not from the ones who rejected you, but from the one who redeems everything they touched. There is coming a day when the story will shift, when what once felt like a wound will feel like wisdom, when what once made you cry will now make you grateful, not because the pain disappears, but because its power is removed. It no longer commands your thoughts, no longer consumes your heart, no longer shapes your decisions. Instead, it becomes a memorial, evidence of what God carried you through. You'll begin to see how the very experience that threatened to end you became the foundation for the new strength you walk in. You'll find yourself speaking life to others from a place you once thought you'd never rise from. And that, more than anything, is how you know healing has taken root. Not when you forget what they did, but when it no longer defines who you are. You are not the abandoned one. You are not the betrayed one. You are not the forgotten one. You are the one God never took his eyes off. The one he preserved through every storm. The one he is now lifting, not so you can rise above others, but so you can see life from his perspective. They hurt you more than strangers ever could, not because they were stronger, but because you were open, vulnerable, brave enough to love fully. And though they mistook that love for weakness, God never has. He's turning your open heart into a testimony, not just a story of pain, but a story of purpose. As you walk forward, perhaps still carrying traces of the ache, still piecing together the parts of yourself they tried to break, you may wonder, why did God allow me to experience this? It is a question whispered from the depths of every soul that has known betrayal. But maybe the answer is not in the pain itself, but in what the pain revealed. Maybe it was to show you how deeply you could love, how fiercely you could endure, how gracefully you could rise. Pain uncovers what comfort often hides, and what it revealed in you was not weakness, it was sacred strength, a resilience wrapped in humility, a quiet dignity that refused to harden, even when the world gave every reason to. That is not ordinary. That is rare. And it is the kind of rarity heaven treasures. You weren't meant to become like them. You weren't meant to mirror their coldness, their apathy, their self-serving choices. That's why it hurts so much. Because deep inside, you've always known you were built for something different. You were created not just to survive, but to shine. Not with the harsh light of vengeance, but with the warm flame of unwavering faith. And this faith, though tested, though stretched, though sometimes reduced to a whisper, has never been extinguished. It lives in the way you continue to show up, in the way you still choose love, even cautiously, in the way you fight every day not to let your heart grow numb. That choice is your offering. That decision is your victory. They may never understand the damage they caused. They may never see beyond the illusion they built to protect their own ego. But God does not operate within illusions. He sees you fully, loves you completely, and walks with you faithfully. While they crafted a version of the story that cast you as the problem, God has written a truth that cannot be erased. A truth in which your pain has purpose, your scars have meaning, and your future is still intact. Do not measure your healing by the world's pace. Some wounds bleed longer because they cut deeper. But even the slowest healing is still progress. Even on the days when you feel like you've gone backward, grace is still pulling you forward. What matters most is not how fast you mend, but how real you are with the one who mends you.